Didn't start yet, Jess.
Thanks.
It started.
Okay, welcome guys to the second of 2 parts to Power BI training for PIHP staff. In the first part, people learned how to read Power BI reports, basically what the reports are capable of and how you hit all the different buttons and make things work. Today is going to be focused not on how to read the reports, but how to make them. We're going to talk about how to import data, how to create reports, and how to publish and share those reports on powerbi.com. So I'm just going to jump to that right now. This is the handout that was made available through the calendar appointment. I can every once in a while tell you where we are in this document, but for the most part, I'm not going to be using it. I'm going to just demonstrate live in Power BI.
Jess, I don't think you're sharing your screen just yet.
Thank you, Michelle. How about now?
Yep, there you go.
Oh, thank you as usual, Michelle. So this right here is the handout. I'll be telling you where we are, what page. So let's go right now and open up Power BI Desktop. You should have an icon there somewhere. I will say that Power BI Desktop is significantly more laggy than Power BI Service, which is what's online at powerbi.com. So if you're noticing that nothing's going wrong, that's just as expected. When you first open Power BI Desktop, you get this welcome mat. You can just close that out. And you're going to want to sign in first before you do anything. So in the upper right, you should see something that says sign in. Since you guys are all at the PIHP, you're going to want to use your work email because each of your work emails has been connected to the special license to give you the privileges we need you to have. So put your work email address here and get your phone handy because this is where you're going to do the multi-factor authentication. So while you guys are signing in, I'll just give a little break and talk about the data set we're going to be using. This data set is based on Cricket Report 1020A, which lists out all the authorizations for whichever counties or maybe all of the counties. For the purposes of this demonstration here, I took a data set comprised of the auths between 10.1 and 10/31/19, and it looks like I'm getting a text right now. I'm signed in, didn't ask for two. I'm sorry, I'm gonna just move past that.
That's Dana asking a question.
Okay. So I downloaded this data set and I de-identified it so that we can record this session without flashing anybody's Medicaid IDs. That's the file that I sent to you. But just know that everything we're talking about here can also be done with the real data set that you get out of the Cricket reports. So before I move on, is anybody not signed in to the Power BI desktop?
Dana, were you able to actually access everything without the two-factor?
Can you guys do that in a chat on the side? So.
Okay, yep.
Okay, so to illustrate how to pull in data, I'm going to use the simplest example of a data set being pulled in, and that's Excel. There are several ways you can pull an Excel file into Power BI. One is right here, the first thing you see, add data to your report. You could just hit import data from Excel. You could also go to File, Get Data, and then it would say Excel Workbook. You could also go here at the ribbon. It says Excel Workbook. Whichever you want to do, go ahead and click Get It. And now you're going to want to navigate to that Excel file that I sent you, 1020A auth DID'd, means de-identified, and hit open. So if you've ever run a Cricut report, you know that there are usually multiple sheets in the Cricut report. There's going to be the data dictionary, which lists out all the different fields and their meaning. And then there's going to be other sheets as well. In this particular report, there is a second sheet called Details, which lists out all the auths. So one of the nice features here when you're pulling in Excel data is you can get a preview so you can tell exactly which sheet you want to pull in. When you find the one you want to pull in, for us, that's Details. You check the box. If you are absolutely 1000% positive that there's no data cleaning or transformations that you need to do on the data set, you could hit load. But best practice is to take a detour and actually hit transform data before you do anything else, so you can check out the data set, make any cleaning steps you need to, and then get on with your report building. So I've clicked Details, and now I'm going to hit transform data. When you hit that, you're brought to something called Power Query Editor, PQE, which is a place where you do all your cleanup and inspection. Right here, Power Query Editor. Everything you do here in your cleanup efforts is saved as a programmed step right here in the applied steps, so that every time you refresh your data, you don't have to redo all the cleaning steps. It just remembers it's sort of like a macro. So there's a zillion things you can do here as far as cleanup is concerned. I'm only going to talk about a few that will probably be useful to you. The first I want to talk about is this. The original data set in that sheet in Excel, the first row had a title there, percent of authorized units, as of report run date, blah, 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 blah. And so it read the data in wrong. It actually pulled the real column names down to the data instead of the column names. So we have to fix that. This must happen an awful lot because they have a button special made for this circumstance. It's right here. Use first row as headers. So you hit use first row as headers. This is called promoting headers. And now you can see the column names are correct. And you also notice that in applied steps, something just got added. Another thing you're definitely going to want to do is when it pulls in data from Excel, it names the data set after the sheet name, in this case, Details. You're going to want to give it a name that is helpful to your future self when in months or maybe even years from now, you're looking at this data set and you want to know where the heck it came from. So give it a name that will be meaningful to you later. To do that, you right-click, hit Rename, and like in this example, Cricut Report 1020A is a pretty meaningful name. Now you know where to go back to, where was the data definitions? Where did I get it? Where can I get it again? Another thing you can do here is change the data type. If you look next to each variable, you can see what data type it assumed it is. Categorical is represented with an ABC icon. Numeric, meaning something you could add and multiply, is represented with a 1, 2, 3. There's also dates. It's represented with a little calendar. And there's a few more as well. The way it decides the data type is by looking at the first 1,000 rows of data and just guessing. And it's usually right. But if it's not right, you may have to fix it. So you do want to check out and make sure that everything read in with the appropriate type. Sometimes it's more of a, I want to say, cosmetic change. Like here, percent of expected units used. It's pulling it in as a decimal. It's a little easier on the eyes when a percent is, I think, formatted as a percent. So I would say this is more of a cosmetic change. If you want to change it to be formatted as a percent, you click that icon and choose what you want, which is percentage. You hit replace current. And there you go. Some changes are a must-have. So the one I just showed you was cosmetic, but an example of a must-have would be, what if it pulled in a date as categorical? That would really ruin your analysis later on down the road. So you have to, if it's a date, it has to have pulled in as a date. So I can see effective date, for example, was pulled in as a date, that little calendar icon. But if it hadn't been, if it said ABC up here, you'd want to change that to be a date. That'll really mess things up later if you don't. So that's changing the type. Another thing is there may be variables that you need that are not already in this data set, and you can create columns here. So for example, let me just look at the organization type. Tells you the type of organization that created this authorization. It might be useful to you to know whether that organization type was SUD or mental health. And the way you would know that is if the organization type says SUD agency, then it's SUD. Otherwise, it's mental health. So to make a new column that tells you that, because it's conditional on organization type, you go to Add Column and choose Conditional Column. It's conditional on a variable that's already in there. New custom name. The variable that I want to make, I'm going to call it SUD or MH. The way it's going to work, if I'm going to choose organization type equals, I'm going to type in SUD agency. This is that value that's right there. You don't need quotes, but you do need to spell it right. No extra spaces, no misspellings. SUDAGENCY. If the organization type is SUD agency, what do I want my new variable to be? I want the output to be SUD. I could at this point say, yeah, everything else. So else, I want my new variable to say MH. But just so you know, if you do it this way, then even the blank organization types are going to be assigned MH. And a lot of times that's not appropriate. So the way you could make sure that organization type of blank gives you a new output of blank is by adding a clause right here. So I'm going to say if organization type is SUD agency, then SUD. Else, otherwise, if organization type is blank, the way you say that is by typing the word NULL. You don't leave it blank. You don't use quotes, just NULL. Then I want my output to also be blank, NULL. So putting it together, this is what this says in English. I want a new variable called SUD or MH. The way it's defined is if the organization type is SUD agency, then that new variable is SUD. Otherwise, if the organization type is blank, then my new variable is blank. Otherwise, put everything else as MH. And when you hit OK, you can see the new variable has been added. It's giving you values of SUD and MH. Are there any questions about that?
Okay. Jessica, does it take equations for numeric values like greater than, less than, equal to?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Well, all right. If MI. Oh, good. Oh, hang on a second. Age. Yeah.
Okay,
Good question.
I'll figure it out. Thank you.
Sure. So that's basic transformations. You can also use the Power Query Editor to look for dirty data. So the way you can do that is if you go over to View, if you hit here under Data Preview, Column Distribution, it gives you a little bar chart of the values that each variable has, but just for the first 1,000 rows. So it's not the be all end all in checking the data, but it does help. So for example, affiliate, it's saying there are 3 distinct values. Well, we know there are more than 3 distinct affiliates for our PIHP, but that's only because it's the first 1,000 rows. But if it said something like 10 distinct values, well, then we'd know there's probably some misspelling, something's going wrong. So you can sort of eyeball this, see if there's anything you need to do. If you hit column profile, you get to see a much more detailed view of that. So I'm going to click affiliate. And now instead of just there were 3 distinct values, I get to see what those 3 distinct values are. And I can see if there were any that were empty or in error. That thing empty in error, you can get a quick snapshot of it also if you hit column quality. And now you can just get an eyeball of the entire data set if there was any empties, like 95% empty, that kind of thing. I don't know what error means there. I've never had one, but evidently it's a thing. So if you were to find a mistake, an anomaly, you could do the cleaning. I want to also just note, let's say that I'm looking here at applied steps. These are it's like a macro, all the steps that need to be taken to clean this data set. If you accidentally add a step and you don't like it, to get rid of that step, you hit the little X. Like, let's say I didn't want to add that conditional column. That was a mistake. I don't want this to be repeated every time I read in the data. I'm not going to do it, but I could hit that X and that'll go away as a step. So once you have your data cleaned up the way you want it, what you do is you get out of the Power Query Editor by hitting Close and Apply.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
Yes, you can. Let me just quickly say, to get back, you hit Transform Data. So I may go back to answer Matt's question. Go ahead, Matt.
Are you able to combine databases with the
Yes.
add column? Okay.
Oh, wait, combine databases
Well,
or combine columns, do you mean?
no. I have one database that has all the direct care worker rates applied to individual payments, but I can only download the individual payments from Cricket. So what I do in Excel is use a VLOOKUP to look at the one database and import it into the file I'm working with.
I get where you're going. That's not
Yeah.
what you do in Power Query Editor. You do it here in this main window, and I'll talk about that in just a second. That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Sure. So I closed out of Power Query Editor, and now I'm back in the main Power BI desktop. I don't really know what you call it, but this is the main program. If I needed to get back to Power Query Editor, I could always hit Transform Data, but just so you know, that's not the main thing. That's a detour out of the program. And for those who are interested, I'm on page 21 of the PDF. There are 3 main views that you want to become familiar with in Power Desktop. The first one is where we land right when we come here. This is the report view. You know you're here, or the way you get here is by clicking this little, I don't know, a column chart icon. The next view is the data view. And you get to it by clicking this spreadsheet icon. And this gives you a spreadsheet view of the underlying data set, sort of like what Excel would look like, and a little bit like what the Power Query Editor looked like. And the last view is the model view. And you get to it by this, I don't know, 3 boxes connected by lines. Matt, this is where you would see, in this particular example, I have one data set that's being pulled in, but it will not be uncommon at all, especially for you, it sounds like, to be pulling in multiple data sets. So you would, if you wanted to pull in another data set, you would go to Excel workbook and pull it in, and you'd see two data sets over here. And the way you would link them is here in model view, you would be dragging from one variable name to the other. There is far more information on how to do that in the Power BI trainings online, which I have linked in the more information section of the handout, and I'll be talking about it at the end today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So I'd like to just one by one go through these three different views and talk about the most important things I think there is to see in each. So let's start here with model view. As I said a second ago, if there was more than one data set in this model, you would see them all here. In this case, there's just one, but you'd see them here and you'd see the connections they have, like they may be connected by case number or by team or whatever. The other thing that's handy here in model view is if you head over to the fields pane, you see all your data sets listed here. And if you expand them, you see the fields in each. So this has all those variable names, including the one we made there, SUD or MH. If you click any one of those fields, you get a chance to change its properties. Like you can give it a different name, you can give it a different synonym, you can add a description, something like a data dictionary definition. One thing that's really handy, if you have many fields in your data set, it sometimes gets hard to find something, and you can group them into folders. So the way you do that is you highlight, let's like here's CPT mod 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I highlight all of those. I did that by hitting Shift and clicking through. While these are all highlighted, in display folder, put modifiers and hit Enter. Now all those modifiers are in the modifiers folder. You could have every single field in its own folder if you want. If you've got a lot of fields, it makes it much easier to navigate. So that's, I think, the highlights of the model view. Let's talk about the data view. I showed you a second ago how to add a column in Power Query Editor. That's one of three ways that a new column can be added to your data set. I'm going to give you the three ways in order of preference. The first and very best way, resource-wise and just simple, like simplicity-wise, is for me to add a variable to the data set before it even gets to you. So this is pulled out of report 1020A. If there's something absolutely missing that needs to be there, like SUD or MH, you know you need it there. The best use of resources is to just email me and say, can you add SUD or MH to the data set so that it's there before you even get to Power Query Editor. The second best choice is to do the Power Query Editor, like I said, and have it as a program step so that every time you import the data, it gets added in. The last way and least favorable way to add a column is to do it here in the, what do you call this again? Data view? I can't remember. This one. If you choose to make a variable here, it's not like everything's going to break down. It's not the end of the world, but it's just the least, it's more use of resources than you probably need to use. It's not going to hurt anything, but it's just not efficient. And also, to make a new column in this view, you have to program in a syntax called DAX, which is a little ugly. It's very similar to formulas in Excel. So I think all of you guys are probably pretty proficient in Excel. You know how you do a conditional formula in Excel? Do you guys know? If equals if, yeah. If you wanted to do the SUD or MH here, you would be using syntax. You'd be saying SUD or MH equals if organization type, you know what, it's uglier, not as good. So why would you ever make a column in data view? There are some cases where the Power Query Editor is not going to be available to you just because of permissions. And the only choice you have for modifications would be doing it here. And in that case, you just got to buckle down and do some DAX. It's not the worst thing in the world. The other thing is, in Power BI, there are what are called measures, which are fields that describe an aggregation you want in your final report. You have to set these up ahead of time, and you cannot do that in Power Query Editor. So let me make sure I said that again. Right. When you're doing a Power BI report, oftentimes you know ahead of time what it is you're going to be aggregating, like total units, total number of cases, total distinct cases, stuff like that. When you know what those are, you need to set them up as, quote, measures. And you cannot do that in Power Query Editor. You can only either do it here, new measure, or actually you can do it here, new measure. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now, how to set up a measure. So this is an auth report. I can just imagine you guys, I'm sure off the dome, could come up with 5 different things that you're going to want to aggregate with this data set eventually. I'm just going to show you one. Let's say I know ahead of time that I'm going to want to know distinct cases. However I slice and dice the data, I'm going to want to know number of distinct consumers. So I'm going to create that as a measure. I'm going to hit new measure. And now I have, this is where you're going to start writing in DAX. So you always start by saying the name of the column or measure that you're making. I'm going to name this thing distinct cases. Then you hit equals. One of the nice things about Power BI is it has a lot of autofill, so you don't have to be guessing at the names of the functions. So if I just start typing distinct, I already see there's 3 choices that use that word distinct. And the one I'm looking for is distinct count. You can hit tab to say, yeah, that's the one I want. If I wanted to, I could just scroll through all the fields that are available to me. Distinct count of, it would have been case number. But you could also just start typing. If I start typing, all I have to get to is CAS, and I can see my choices are these 2. I want case number. So I'm going to hit tab and say, yeah, that's the one. So this is how DAX syntax works. You say the name of your field, equals, and then your formula, a lot like Excel formulas. You can hit enter to make it finalized. Unlike in Power Query Editor, when we added that column, you're not going to see a column here for that new measure. But what you will see is in the fields list, it is listed, and it'll have a special icon of a calculator indicating it's a measure. Okay, then the last thing is let's get to report view. This is where you actually build the report that your users are going to see. This is your blank canvas. So we've got here the blank canvas where we put our visuals. We have the visualizations we choose from, and then we have the fields that populate those visualizations. This is a huge topic. And again, I want to put in a plug for the Microsoft training on this. If you have time, I can't stress this enough. Sit down, take a day, and go through that training on all the stuff you can do with these visualizations. But even though it is a huge topic, the nice thing is it's very intuitive and almost everything works the exact same way. And that is this. You choose a visualization. So like, let's say we're doing a clustered column chart. Click it. Now you get a blank clustered column chart. And then you take fields from the fields pane and drag it into the different parameters for that visualization. So for this one, let's take distinct cases and pull it over to the values box. And if you've done pivot tables, it's real similar. You know, in the pivot table, the bottom right, it says values. It's really the same thing, except the only difference is we pre-aggregated it. We told it what aggregation we want. So right away, we see the total distinct cases in the data set. Not that interesting until we start adding things. If I take affiliate and drag it over to the axis box, now I see distinct cases by affiliate. I can resize just by dragging. You could also have put it in the legend. In some cases, that's better. Not this one, but you could do that. And many, many other things you could do just to see how many cases there are. To format, you hit this little paint roller. Many options. And I don't really know what that analytics thing does. Are there any questions so far about making a visualization? Okay. I forgot to say, one thing you might want to do is, let's say you did this clustered column chart. You're like, it looks good, but is this the very best visualization for what I want? You can just start clicking while you're got that selected. You can just start clicking the other options, see which one you like best. Okay, so let's say that this is our final report. Kind of boring, but this is it. The next step is obviously you want to save it. So to save your work, you could go to File, Save As. And the extension for Power BI reports and data sets, they come as pairs, is PBIX. So you're going to want to save that someplace secure because it is hot with, you know, PHI usually. But I'm going to save this on my desktop and I'm just going to call it my auth report. It'll take a second. So I'm going to close it down. Let's say I'm done for the day. Tomorrow I come in. Tomorrow I come in and I want to get back to that Power BI report. I just go to the PBIX like any file that you'd work with. Double click it. It'll open up in Power BI Desktop. Anybody who has access to this PBIX file and Power BI Desktop will be able to open this report. We'll talk a little bit later about their ability to refresh and stuff, but they'll be able to see your data set and the report. Like I said, you do want to put it in a secure place. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to refresh the data if you've got a new data set. So this was October. Let's say I am going to be pulling in auths every month. I have the November data and I also have the December data and January and so on. How do I refresh this? Well, if you download the new data set and save it in the exact same location with the exact same name as the original data set, then you can just hit refresh and it'll update your graphs. But if you have, if you download the Cricut report and it's got either a different location or a different name, then there are a couple other steps you need to take to refresh the data. You actually need to change the data source. So the way that works is, and I'm on page 26 of the handout. The way that works is you go to the Power Query Editor, which is Transform Data. I saved a second version of this report. You guys don't have it, so maybe you don't need to actually You don't need to click along, maybe just watch. But what you would do is you would go to data source settings. Right now, this is where it thinks the data source lives. You'd want to change it. Browse, and I'm going to use, here's version 2, just to illustrate how it works. Hit open, okay. Close. You're not going to see any changes here in the Power Query Editor until you hit refresh preview. And now you see it. The version 2 is the same thing as version 1, only it's just the first 13 rows. So notice I didn't have to promote headers. I didn't have to rename the data set. I didn't have to make SUD or MH. That's, I'm sure it was obvious already, but just to make it more obvious, that's what it means to have programmed steps. You don't have to redo that every time you pull in the data. So now I hit close and apply. It takes a second to think about it. Very laggy. And voila, we have the updated version of this exact same report. So you can imagine if you have a zillion visualizations in here and tables set up, it's going to be very handy. Just replace the data set and it's all fresh. So that completes the how to make reports section of this training. The next thing I want to talk about is how to publish and share. That is page 28 of the handout. Before I get there, though, are there any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Okay, moving on. So, like I said, anyone who has access to your PBIX file will be able to open your Power BI report and data set. But that style of sharing is static. And it's just like sharing an Excel file. It's not going to update when you have new data. It's a point in time. The nice thing about Power BI is it gives you the option to share things with people in a more dynamic way, so that every time the data set refreshes, like you can have it on a schedule if you've got it hooked up to a certain data source, every time it refreshes, the report refreshes. So if you want to share a report with people in that style, then you don't want to be doing it through the PBIX. You want to be doing it by publishing your report and data set and then sharing. And those are two different steps we'll talk about in a second. Before I do, though, this is where I think the main confusion about Power BI can come from. You might try to publish and share with somebody and they're not seeing it and you don't understand why. There are restrictions above and beyond just putting their name, typing their email in the share button. And I want to talk about what those are so that there's no confusion about this. First of all, your recipient has to have a special Power BI license in order to view your content. Everybody at the PIHP has this license, but there's right now only one such user account per CMH. So you can't, for example, send it to Wendy Cadu at LCMHA. You have to send it to lcmha@cmhpsm.org. There's a special email address that functions for the entire CMH. And I know what the Lenaway one is. I'm not sure if we have the others yet, but if we don't have them now, they're coming soon. So there's that. They have to have the special license. Also, even if they have the special license, you can't just share with anybody on the earth. They have to be a member of the PIHP's, quote, tenant. Like they have to be at CMHPSM. Or they have to be in a tenant that we have set up as a trusted source. So if you're sending your Power BI report to somebody who has a special license and they're not seeing it, it may be that they're not in our tenant or they're not a trusted source. In that case, you would talk to Michelle, and if approved, then she would set things up so that organization is a trusted source. There is an approval process, though. It's not automatic. So it's a little bit restrictive, but all that said, let's talk about how to do it. When you want to publish a report, let's say I want to publish this one, in Power BI Desktop, you go to the upper right and you hit Publish. Do you want to save? Yes, I do. It thinks about it. The first thing it asks you is, from what workspace do you want to share this report? You can only share from a workspace, and that's kind of like a folder, from a workspace where you have at least, quote, member privileges. There's different hierarchies of privileges. There's member, contributor, admin. Those are the 3 levels where you get to publish from that workspace. And then there's viewer at the very bottom. You can't publish from a workspace if you're only a viewer. In all of the workspaces that I set up, you guys are viewers. So you're not going to be able to publish to all affiliates in PIHP or to Lenawee or whatever. We have not come up with our protocol on what to use when. What we know is we want to avoid the chaos of the M drive. We want to have this tidy. So for now, until those protocols are set up, just here's the bottom line: publish from my workspace. So I'm clicking my workspace, which is kind of like my documents. You can always publish from my workspace, and hit select. It'll think about it a bit. And then, yay, success. So now where do you see it published? This is where we have to switch over to powerbi.com to see the published report. So get your phones handy. This is where we're going to need to do the multi-factor authentication again. So I'm going to go to my browser. And in the URL, I'm going to type powerbi.com. This is not the screen you're going to see. That's frustrating. Let's do it over here. Oh, for goodness sake. I'm just trying to get it to not know who I am so I can illustrate how to sign in. Well, when you get to powerbi.com, in the upper right, well, it's not shown there either. In the upper right, there's a place to sign in. You need to sign in to make this work. Actually, I know where I can show you. Sign in. It looks like that. And we do the multi-factor. So it's important that you've signed in with the same username that you did with desktop. That's how you know you're in the same space. So I signed in with my work email. And I'm going to go over to workspaces. This is from part 1, workspaces. And it's giving me all the workspaces that I have access to at the moment. And up at the very top, it says my workspace. I'm going to click on that. And now I get to see all the things that are published out of my workspace. My auth, report is one of them. And I can see that it was last refreshed 7/12, that's today, at 12:03, that's 3 minutes ago. Okay, that's the one. There's a report, that's the blue one, and there's a data set, that's the red one. So I can see the fruits of my labor. I have, in fact, published this report, but what I haven't done is share it. These are two separate steps. So let's talk about, once it's published, how you share. You can only share from powerbi.com. You can't do it from desktop. So you publish from desktop, you share from powerbi.com. To share, you go to the report, and when you hover over it, you get the share icon. You click that, and you're brought to this little window that says, and it's right now, I could at this exact, at this moment, oops, just leave it where it is, people at your organization. This is how it looked. I could copy the link and then send that in an Outlook email, and everybody who has that link would be able to see the report. If you don't want everybody with the link to be able to see it, this is where you change those settings. So the second choice is people with existing access. What this means is, let's say I have this in a workspace where Jason and Michelle have been given they are not viewers, they are members or contributors or admin. Then no matter if I share it with them or not, they will have access to that report when they pop into the workspace. They'll see it there. But if for whatever reason I wanted to send them the link as well, even though they could just go in and get it, then I would click this, hit apply, and then I would copy the link and send it to them. Hey, there's a new report in there. The third option is if there's only very specific people that you want to have access to this report, then you hit specific people. For all of these choices, you can also either add or remove the ability for them to share this report with other people or build content based on the data. But let's get back to specific people. If there's very specific people, if I hit apply, then I can start entering their names. Let's say I'm sending it to Jason. And I could just hit send and he'd get an email. Hey, I have this report for you to see. Sorry about the junk mail, Jay. Let's say you've been doing that for a while now. People keep saying, can I get access to that report? Oh, okay, share, and you give them access. And after a while, you've sort of lost track of who did I give access to even? I don't remember. In that case, if you hit share up here by send link, there's an ellipsis, and you can hit manage permissions, and you can see all the people who have access to it. It says right here, Jason has access to it. You can remove their access, or you can even give access in this screen. Another way to manage permissions is right here on this ellipsis at the report name, you could say manage permissions. Direct access, pending. It says, I sent a link to specific people and he has read and reshare permission, so on. Direct access is somehow different, and I can't say I understand the difference, but evidently it is. Are there any questions about that, how to share? Okay. Then the last topic I want to hit is how to be on the receiving end of a shared data set, a published Power BI data set. This, I think, is the most complicated part of Power BI, and every day I'm learning a new thing that I didn't understand the day before. So forgive me if this is a bit of a mess. I'm kind of learning as I go. But, and I'm on page 30 of the handout. So if you've been given access to a data set, someone published a Power BI data set and they gave you access to it, you could use that in the get data part of your report building. Instead of going Excel like we did in the very beginning of this training, you could say get data, Power BI data sets. So I'm going to go back and get data, Power BI data sets. It's close. This program, you can only have one thing going at a time. Actually, let me just close out. The easiest is to close out and open a new one altogether. So show the desktop. And it's very laggy, so we'll have to sit here. While we wait, I'll show you the handout version of it. So you're in Power BI desktop. You know that you have access to a certain Power BI data set that was already published. You go Home, Get Data, Power BI data sets. Okay, here we go. It shows me a list of all the Power BI datasets to which I've been granted access. And let's say I want to make a report based on this one, rate example. I click it, I hit create. And now I see this dataset. Notice what's missing though. You don't get to see the data view, and transform data is grayed out. So there are no options to transform the data set if you pull it in this way. The only thing you can do is create visualizations. You cannot transform the data at all. But in many cases, that's really all you want. So just so you know, as it says here, oops, no option to transform data. You get what you get. So let's say I make a visualization based on this. Just going to do something stupid. Just okay, CPT is the axis, and this is you can refresh this. It's right now it's static. It's just based on the data when you first got it. But if you hit refresh, this view will refresh as often as that source data is refreshed. So this could be a nice option if you don't want to publish it, you just want to see it for yourself. You know that the source data refreshes every day or whatever. So you have it and then you refresh it as you go. Also, if you were to save this and publish it out to Power BI, it would automatically refresh as often as the source data refreshes. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that using Power BI data sets? Okay, so the main things I said there, I get confused in it, so forgive me. I have to repeat just so I can keep track of it. You can't transform the data. What you get is what you get. If you want to change it, then you would have to ask me or whoever the author of the data set is to add or change whatever you want so that when you get it, it's as you need it. So can't transform the data. It refreshes manually in Power BI Desktop by you hit the refresh button. And if you publish this out to powerbi.com, your published report will automatically refresh as often as the underlying data set refreshes. And that's all this stuff. The second thing I want to talk about is if you happen to get a hold of the PBIX file for someone else's report. The more I have played around with this with the Lenaway users, because we've been sort of using them as guinea pigs, the less I like this option. But let me at least just talk about it so that you can know the limitations of doing it this way. So let's say we are sharing a report PBIX file. It's on the M drive. One of us made it and the other person is opening it. That's one way that you might be looking at a PBIX for someone else's report. Another way is if you have been granted access, you can actually in powerbi.com get the PBIX file. Like if you go to data sets, you'll see all the data sets that to which you've been granted access. If the report was published in a workspace where you have at least member privileges, then when you hit the ellipsis, you'll also get this option, download the PBIX. So that's another way that you might have access to the PBIX file from someone else's report. I'm just going to do that to show you what that looks like. So I get my PBIX file, I save it. I'm going to close this out. Say. So what would it look like if I opened someone else's PBIX that I just downloaded from powerbi.com? Very laggy program. So notice the difference here. When I said get data, Power BI data set, all I had was the data set on the right. It didn't come with the report as well. When you open someone's PBIX file, not only are you seeing the data set, but you're seeing how they set up their visualizations. So that's kind of nice if you really just want to do a small tweak. Here's another nice thing. Transform data is back. Data view is back. You can do transformations. But here are the cons. You cannot refresh this data set on your own. If you don't have access to, like, let's say they did it from their C drive, the source data is on their C drive. If you download their PBIX and hit refresh, you don't have access to their C drive. It's going to give you an error. It pretty much assumes you're that same person with access to all the same networks. So you can't refresh this way. If you were to try to publish out to powerbi.com, when you do that, it would publish it with your version of the data set. It would be a whole different data set than the original source data. And that new data set will not refresh unless you get the original author to take ownership of it and set up a refresh schedule. So pretty much the owner is still going to be involved, and it might be more of a headache than what everybody was hoping to accomplish. So I would recommend that if you need a transformation on the data and you're not the author, like if it's a Cricut report and you're getting it directly fed into Power BI, then the transformations, it's better if I do it on my end. It's less of a headache at the end of the day than getting you to tweak the PBIX and then publish it, and then I have to take ownership of your new data set as well as the old data set. It's just not great. So that's what all this is about. It's a pain, basically. I'm sure that as we all learn more about Power BI, we'll find a time and a place when it really is the best option, but right now I'm not seeing it. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, this is Matt. You
Hey,
said
Matt.
something about loading a Cricut report directly into Power BI.
Yeah, that's the very next thing I want to talk about.
Fantastic. I'll be patient.
No, you don't need to be patient much longer. It's coming. Before I do, though, were there any questions about what I just talked about? Okay. So if you're in a situation where the data set you need is large and you need to download it often, especially I could see this being a finance thing, then you may be a good candidate for something where I load the Power BI data set directly into your Power BI. You would just go to, as I did a second ago, Power BI data sets for your get data. You would have access to it. So I could, for example, the 1020A, I can make that a Power BI data set that is updated every morning, just like a Cricut report. So instead of going to Cricut reports, downloading the Excel and uploading it into here, all you would have to do is go get data, Power BI data set. You would see that data set here, and you're just directly connected. You never have to go to Cricut reports again for that data set. I totally see you using this, Matt. It is, though, an approval process. It's not that everyone who asks is going to get. We want to make sure we move slow as we understand more and more about Power BI. We don't want it to become unmanageable and insecure. So if the resources allow and the project is approved, then yes, I can set you up with a Power BI data set that feeds directly from the report server and is refreshed every morning so that you don't have to go to Cricut to download the data. If that's something you want, then you would contact me or Michelle. I must say, though, it probably for the time being, I'm going to just say you can just have a data set that's basically one of the Cricut reports. We could tweak it a little bit, but well, let's just see as we go. Is that making sense, Matt?
Yep. And as I said, I'll be patient about this. I need to learn Power BI before I can make a request.
Okay. So that really completes the content that I wanted to cover today. Let me say that I have only brushed the surface of what there is to learn. If you're serious about making Power BI reports, what I've given you here is not sufficient. I would say give yourself 1, 2, 3 days, I'm not sure, and go to this link. Everything I've showed you that's how I learned what I learned. Everything I've showed you is just bits and pieces out of this training thing. If you click here, you'll be taken. It's free. It has nice computer labs where they give you a virtual Power BI desktop. They tell you to click this, notice that, da 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 da. It's as good as any paid training that I've ever been to. Very clear. It's taking forever to load, but trust me, it's good. Oh, here we go. So this is the Microsoft Certified Data Analyst Associate training. Very good. Can't recommend it highly enough. So then I really am done now. I'm going to stop recording and stop sharing my screen. At least that's my intention. Nope. Oh, Lord help me. No. There we go. Finally. Stop recording.